All right. Well, I guess we can always just jump right in. Farzana. Jaffer Jaraj. Thank you for spelling your name when I first met you, by the way.
No problem. Sounds more complicated than it really is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, after you spelt it, I was like, oh, it's like phonetics. Exactly how phonetics would tell me to spell it.
Yeah.
That is the spelling of your name. Thank you very much for coming on the show, by the way.
Oh, my honor. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got a huge, I guess, swath that you cover. Like, there's so many different things that we could talk about, and we were having a good conversation just the other day about where we could really go with this conversation. But before we do any of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do for people who aren't already privileged enough to know Farzana Jaffer Jaraj?
Oh, it's my least favorite part, except for the getting to be around other people. I've been a motivational speaker and coach for the last over 20 years now. And throughout that time in the field of coaching, I mean, I became a coach before that was actually a term, coach. But over the last 21 years, I don't think much has changed on my journey personally in terms of finding more truth, understanding myself better, learning how to be the best, truest sense of myself in every engagement with others, how I show up for myself, and so on and so forth. But what that's kind of brought me is an opportunity over many years to learn from other people like yourself and your amazing show. I've been listening to lots of episodes in the last week.
Oh, thank you.
And fun as well.
I like to have some fun with the show. I mean, if we're going to be talking about sex and relationships, it can't be all serious.
Exactly.
I always find it funny too when people say we got to take this relationship a little more. We got to make this relationship serious. I want a serious relationship. I'm like, I don't know if I want a serious one, but like I'll take it seriously. But I want one that's fun.
I'm down with the fun.
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely down with the fun. A good mix of serious with the fun, but not all serious. I can't handle that.
Yeah, my favorite thing is being able to go from serious to fun and back to serious without missing a beat.
What do you mean?
Exactly.
I'm a weirdo. I'm a weirdo. Oh, thank you. You're a great motivational speaker.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. You snort.
Yeah.
I'm going to do everything I can to make you snort more often in this call.
Oh my goodness. It could get a little piggy in here.
Awesome. Okay, so you've been doing this motivational stuff, the coaching. What was a coach called before it turned into a coach? What was it even called?
I think we were called consultants.
Personal consultants? That kind of thing?
Personal consultants, personal advisors. Yeah. I think people that you were called friends.
That you pay?
With paychecks. Yeah.
Friends with paychecks.
I don't know, actually. I mean, I was really lucky. My first exposure to the world of coaching was through Tony Robbins.
Is that where you got your training?
That was where I got my very first training, was from Tony and Joseph. They kind of, I was attending a seminar of theirs 21 years ago, and they kind of saw me helping people, and they pulled me out of the crowd, and I thought I was in trouble. And they're like, "We've been watching you." That usually, as a kid, when a grown-up says they've been watching you, you're in big trouble. At least in my experience, and for something that I probably didn't know I was doing wrong. But they pulled me aside and they just said, "We've been watching how you work with people, and we think that you have a gift, and we'd like to train you. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely, I'm interested." Because since as far back as I can remember, the only thing that I ever wanted to do in my life, and however that looked, was to support people in finding their happiness and enjoying their life, whether it's with another person on their own, whether it's in relation to their work or their career motivation goals. We only get one life as far as we really know, and it's the one that we're in. Therefore, why do we have time? Like, what time is there to waste on doing anything else other than enjoying it and making the most of it?
Yeah, exactly. And even if we do have another life, we're supposed to take the lessons that we get from this one into the next one so that way we can move along the spiritual path of whatever that is, really.
Yeah.
So you ended up learning from some of the best. I mean, you learned from Tony Robbins. That's pretty huge. Did you also dove into hypnotherapy too, am I right?
Hypnotherapy, I mean, I did my first degrees in psychology, communication. I went on to study mediation, negotiation, hypnosis, cognitive neuroscience. I mean, 21 years of having an opportunity to study and learn about the human mind, human behavior, how we work. And I have to say, hypnosis has definitely been one of my most efficient tools in terms of getting people results that last.
Okay, before I go into that, what's cognitive neuroscience?
Okay, cognitive neuroscience, and I mean, it's a full field of study. You can become a cognitive neuroscientist now. And that means we study the connections of how we think and how it maps out in the brain in terms of all of the nerves in our body. So if you think about it, most people think of your brain as just being this mass of nerves in your head. But really, your brain branches down your spine and into every single part of your body. Your entire body consists of your brain. And so when an NLP uses this, and so does hypnosis as well, but anytime you move or you do something with intention, right? So you have an intense amount of emotion. You have all of these neurotransmitters and chemicals that flood along your neurons. Think of your brain and nervous system or as one whole, and they're like a network of pathways leading to different places in your body. And so you've got this giant network, and every time you feel something, it's like you're sending like an airplane full of passengers towards one of those places. So when we move our bodies, when we do certain things, we actually send signals and we send passengers along those routes in our body to certain feelings and otherwise. So if we're happy and we have happiness passengers floating along in our pathways in our mind, it might make us smile. But the opposite is true too. Just like we smile, or do you smile because you're happy? Or are you happy because you smile? If you smile, you can send passengers back because there are links. So everywhere in our body, there are these links between all of the nerve endings, the feelings that we have, and our ability to control those through human behavior, experience, thought, the way we think about things. And so it's the combination of psychology and how our brain and nervous systems work.
So it's kind of like back engineering our state in some ways through our behavior or through our actions. I mean, forward. Okay, I guess
it's both. It's the study of how everything works.
Okay, I guess I was okay. Yeah, I guess I was going back to how Tony talks about it. Like, if you're feeling really, really shy or insecure or blah blah blah, you know, if you raise your arms out, everyone stand up, do this, and then you start to feel powerful because you're in a power stance. So
yeah.
He also talks about resourcefulness. So if you don't have enough resources, you have to create those in your life. So you have to be much more resourceful. And that's also state dependent. So you have to, if you can change your state, then you can become more resourceful and you can get better results in your life. So based on what you're saying there, if you've got these neurons, if I'm smiling, then I'm happy, or am I happy because or am I smiling because I'm happy? If you just start smiling, you can create that state and get yourself out of a negative state, and then thus become more resourceful. So I guess in that sense, I was back engineering from one state into a more positive or resourceful state.
Well, and I think you're actually addressing what is the application of the study of cognitive neuroscience.
Ah, okay.
So you're talking about like the advanced stuff, which is like, let's actually do this stuff right now. Whereas cognitive neuroscience is the study of how it all works between your thoughts and your emotions, back, whether it goes backwards or forwards. It's the study of how all of it works. Cognitive neuroscience is, for example, the study of how and why, when an athlete has injured their right arm, if you make them work out their left arm, their right arm gets better. right? So the injured arm is this one.
Really?
But if you make them work out this one still gets better.
Because of mirror neurons? Is that essentially it?
Mirror neurons, other things. I mean, a neuroscientist at UVic explained it to me in a really beautiful way. He said, even if you have brain damage, and say that brain damage is the place where you used to grow tomatoes, you'll still be able to grow tomatoes in another area of your brain, but it may not be the best tomatoes. They may not be as juicy or as big because they're not getting as much sunlight, and the soil might not be the right kind of mineral content, but you can still do that. And so it's these ideas of neuroplasticity that is studied by cognitive neuroscience, how you change the brain, how you condition and make new patterns, which you were referring to before, of how to create resourceful spaces for yourself. So it's the study of all of that. But I think what you and I like to do more is take that stuff and apply it to people's lives and our own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick second.
Yeah.
Just realized I had to unplug my fridge, otherwise it'll turn on and my mic will pick it up, and then it's hard to edit out the background noises. It's my bad. And this is at about 15 minutes. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make any sense to me if we just learn the knowledge and don't do anything with it. Otherwise, there's no point. I mean, what's the point of knowledge if we aren't going to apply it?
Which is why I didn't become a psychologist.
Yes, fair enough.
I mean, cognitive behavior therapy wasn't really as prominent 21 years ago when I started coaching. And so having learned from Tony Robbins and then going and studying psychology, I'm like, well, why do I need to research all of the stuff that I understand is already common knowledge or common human behavior to prove that there's a correlation, association between these two things when I could actually be supporting people right now? And so I made the decision to coach just for that very reason.
That's awesome. No, I guess I'm kind of following a very similar path. I sort of do off and on coaching right now. And right now I'm not really doing too much. But I'm going to be starting again in the summer of this year, 2018, and then I'm going into school to become a transpersonal therapist. And that starts in September, so I want to get some more practicum hours that are going to be associated with that training, and that's a 3-year program. I'm really, really looking forward to that. But with everything that I've learned thus far, why wouldn't I help people with what it is that I've learned over the last 8 years? I think.
Let's not discount our entire lives, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, we can always say that, but I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, just because someone has life experience doesn't necessarily mean that they have sound advice to be offering to people. I think that if you deliberately study and you deliberately apply the lessons that you learn with regards to making change in your own life, and then you start getting different results, then I think that you're in a better place to start providing coaching to other people to such a degree that you've been able to help yourself and witnessed other people help themselves that you were very closely related to. Mm-hmm. But I think that there needs to be some sort of we need to be cognizant of our own limitations. I think that's also quite important when it comes to mm-hmm. coaching and counseling and things like that. So I kind of want to go back to the hypnotherapy thing and the unconscious mind, because when we were talking before, you had mentioned that it's I tried buying, well, I bought the book, but it's still not here yet. So Yeah, I know. I was hoping he was going to get here in time. So it has to do with the unconscious communication patterns or the unconscious communication styles between partners and how it relates to how our mother or our maternal figure spoke to us when we were growing up. Can you talk more? Like, let's dive into this because I'm so fascinated. I mean, I've got a background in hypnotherapy. I had a part-time hypnotherapy practice, master practitioner of NLP, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
Great, cool. I find this stuff so interesting, and I haven't learned about this. So please enlighten me.
Okay. So there was a guy, Dr. John Kappas, and he kind of revolutionized hypnosis because originally people thought, okay, well, you can only hypnotize 60% of the population. The other half isn't hypnotizable. But that's because the old way of talking to people in hypnosis was to speak at them in a very commanding directive, or what they call as paternal patter.
Close your eyes.
Do this, do that, snap, sleep, like, you know, like the pushing and leaning and catching someone, all that old school type stuff. And the only reason it didn't work is because it only appealed to one subconscious communication style. What's really interesting is anytime you go into a hypnotic state, and that goes to say, anytime you go to your doctor and you have to write down what you have to say to the doctor because otherwise you'll forget it. You go into hypnosis in your doctor's office. You go into hypnosis or into trance when you're driving. And we go into hypnosis anytime we're in a really emotional state. So when we're with a romantic partner and they've pushed a button or something's going on there in our communication with someone else, we trigger that subconscious level of communication. Anytime a button gets pushed and you have an intense emotional reaction, you've gone into a lower state of brainwaves, which basically is what hypnosis identifies as. It's measured in deeper brainwaves as opposed to your alert, sharper brainwaves. So there's this communication style that this guy Kappas figured out, and he discovered that there are two types at the extreme. It's kind of a gradient, so nobody's really 100% one type or the other. But let's say on a scale of 0 to 100, half of the people, like 0 to 50, are people who are subconscious introverted communicators, and 51 to 100 are people who are extroverted subconscious communicators. And this communication style is how you communicate with the whole world, and how you communicate with the whole world developed when you were a child between the ages of 1 to 8. So from 1 to 8 years old, if your maternal figure or your parents, because it doesn't have to be genderized anymore who the maternal figure is.
I mean, yeah, the maternal could be a more feminine father, and the paternal figure could be a more masculine mother. I mean, it's...
Or even it's the parent who is there. It could be your grandpa who was your maternal figure, or your grandma, or a nanny, or an older sibling, because that was the person who showed up for you consistently on a daily basis. Like, that's the definition of maternal figure. So it could have even been your father.
So what would be a paternal figure then? If maternal is the person who constantly shows up, what would the paternal figure be?
So according to the way they do it, the paternal figure is the less absent, less present person. However, it's not something that we'd want to get into in too much detail here, because both parents form your generalized communication to a degree, but more so your primary caregiver. Like, if I were to rewrite John Kappas's work today, I would call it your primary caregiver from 0 to 8 years old, not your maternal figure.
Okay.
If that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your primary caregiver, if they, while you're a child, and when you're a child, you're always in trance. Children's brainwaves are always registered lower, which is why people think that they learn better and they're just so sponge-like with how they absorb information. It's because they're constantly in a state of trance.
Has that been shown scientifically?
Yeah. Children don't have much beta. So the brainwaves go beta, alpha, theta, and delta. So it's like an acronym I use: B at the door, beta being the most alert state, and alpha, theta, and delta being the deepest one. But children are always in alpha. And apparently our technology is forcing them to go into beta at earlier ages. but that alpha brainwave state, when we wake up in the morning, when we wake up, we're coming out of theta, slowly going into alpha, and then we become beta after our first coffee. I'm joking. But usually around, like after we've been up for a couple of hours, that's when we hit our sharpest moment of alertness. The children are always in that slightly dreamlike state, or that light state of trance. And so literally, when you're a child, you're like a brand new computer, okay? And granted, you got some stuff with your computer that you didn't want to. Maybe you didn't want GarageBand, but it's on your computer, okay? But the first 8 years of your life is like you receiving, you're installing software, right? Your OS is kind of like your fight or flight, your nervous system. All these things are programmed. You've got a hard drive for memory. You've got all of these pathways. You've got ability to learn things. But when you're growing up, it's the way everybody communicates around you, taken in by your sight, your hearing, your sense of smell, taste, touch, and everything you observe goes into your brain in different ways. And so if you're growing up and your primary caregiver speaks to you in a way that is consistent, they say what they mean and they mean what they say, and rules are clear and consequences are fair and consistent, you're going to become what I call an extroverted subconscious communicator. Okay? Meaning, because your primary caregiver said what they meant and meant what they said, as you get older, your natural tendency will be to take people at face value, to hear that people mean what they say, or to think that subconsciously. And
and we always do that too. We always perceive the world through our paradigm, through our lens. We always look at the world as though they're looking at us in the same way.
Exactly.
Or will communicate with us in the same way.
Yeah. And so the flip side of that, so that was like, that's 51 to 100 on the score chart of people getting like, say someone's like, let's go to the extreme. Their parent always said what they meant. They always meant what they said. The rules were clear, the consequences were clear, and they felt like it was fair most of the time, whether spanking, scolding, followed by affection. That makes the extroverted communicator. But on the other side here, if a parent, the primary caregiver, did not say what they meant, did not mean what they said, then at a very young age, like if the child was spoken to in tones or glances or look, that child is going to subconsciously, at a very deep level, think people don't say what they mean. They're going to learn to read between the lines constantly. And if the rules and consequences were unclear or ever unfair, if they were followed by being ignored or smothered, they're going to learn that touch is a punishment. Whereas the other person, if they are usually paid attention to and given affection or hugging afterwards, are going to learn that touch equals love. So they're going to have very different ways of how they deal with things. And so as you grow up into the world, and you can even see this in one family unit, there will be a tendency for girls to be expected to understand subtle communication from a very young age, and boys to be spoken to in a very literal way. And I'm not saying that's all cases, because everybody has a unique family dynamic.
It's a generalization. It's a general.
In general, yeah. So, because we're looking at trends here, we're speaking about a paradigm, so I'm going to have to generalize a bit today. But yeah, so what starts to happen is it kind of makes sense that women have a tendency to hear tone more than the words, or they don't just hear the words. Whereas there is a tendency for men in communication to be like, just tell me what you want, tell it to me straight, don't expect me to know. And yes, there are variances, and we sort of meet halfway through, and nobody's one extreme or the other, but there's definitely that. And then there's the fact that men can be raised on the one side where they were spoken to in tones and glances. You see that a lot in Eastern cultures. In a lot of Eastern cultures, a tone, a look, a glance means a lot more than, the words said. Whereas I find in Western culture, there's been a trend over the last 100 years in parenting to speak to your children with clarity and to say what you need and to be very direct in communication. So you'll see a lot of people communicating differently that way. And how it affects us is that if you were raised to be an introverted communicator or to hear, like, you're going to hear inferences. So you're always going to be reading between the lines. I think we established that we're both the introverted communicator. We were both raised in that way with tones and whatnot. Yes.
I'm definitely more of an extrovert. Yeah, I'm definitely more of an extroverted communicator.
Okay.
I've always had a pretty strong intuition, and I think my mom taught me that different people speak differently. Mm-hmm. So if I was saying something and she didn't quite understand, she would ask me, "What did you mean by that word, Ryan? What were you thinking? Like, what were you trying to say?" Because I interpreted it this way, and that makes me a little upset. Is that what you meant? So that's the way that she spoke to me, so I'd have to be a lot more clear. So I would have to re-say things. My dad was also very, very clear. If he said no, he meant no. And I remember this one time, he said, "You know what, Ryan? If you get straight A's this year, I'll buy you another dirt bike. Okay, it's September. You have until June of next year. If you get straight A's, I'll buy you another dirt bike." Because I had to get rid of the other one because I was too big for it. I think it was 9 or 10 at this time. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And my dad always, my dad was amazing. I mean, he had his flaws like everyone does, but he was amazing. I'm very blessed and fortunate that way. And I remember at the end of that next year, I didn't get straight A's. I think I had a couple B's, but mostly A's, but a couple of B's. And I was like, that'll be fine. My dad's gonna buy me a dirt bike anyways. It's okay. He didn't buy me a dirt bike, and I was really disappointed. I was waiting for it. I thought he was gonna surprise me with one. A month, a couple days go by, a couple weeks go by. I don't think this is happening. Aw. And then a month goes by into the summer, and I still don't have a dirt bike. And I'm like, I'm not getting this. Damn it. And my dad was always very solid. Same thing, more so than my mom. Yeah. So I would definitely consider myself to be a bit more of an extroverted communicator, where I mean what I say.
Mm-hmm. Well, extroverted communicators, everybody intends to mean what they say. But here's the thing. The introverted communicator, because they grew up with such uncertainty, because they grew up being forced to learn to read between the lines to be able to figure out what was happening next, they become subconsciously a very literal speaker in general. Okay?
The extroverted speaker is more literal?
So, hear me out. Introverted communicators. So if you grew up with a parent who didn't say what they meant and didn't mean what they said, you're going to hear everything with multiple entendres. You're going to hear the inferences in everything.
Yes.
But when you speak as an introverted communicator, you're going to speak very literally, very precisely. Or not at all. You'll either speak very precisely or not at all, because sometimes speaking would mean conflict. Introverted communicators tend to avoid conflict. So, and because they only know how to speak directly, they'll usually be silent. And so they'll be very quiet. Whereas the extroverted communicator who is taught, people say what they mean what they say, tends to hear very literally. So they hear literally, they take people at face value. And if they didn't initially, you were taught how to listen more carefully, whereas a lot of extreme extroverted communicators will be very trusting and they'll get screwed over in life, or they'll have a lot of circumstances where things happen that are embarrassing, or they have moments where they're seen as naive, or they feel like they were made a fool of. and they'll go through life, and then they'll learn to look more critically at things, but they tend to take people at face value. They tend to, as soon as they hear something, take it in as truth. But they also tend to speak in inference. They tend to speak inferentially, meaning that usually they would have had, like you take the parent who, with a little toddler, and the toddler reaches for something, the parent grabs and gives it to them. Or I see it all the time where kids aren't learning how to speak as fast as some of their classmates. And it's because the parents are always anticipating their needs. And so a lot of the time that can be the case with extroverted communicators, where they'll say, "Oh, you remember that thing?" And the extroverted communicator will say, "Oh, the other thing, and I left it on the thing." And the introverted communicator will be like, "Oh yeah, that thing," because the introverted communicator will pick up the inferences from it.
Oh my God. Okay, then I am an extroverted communicator, because
Yeah.
I've tended to be very, very gullible. And then that does make sense actually, because we all want to be understood. We all think that we're speaking literally, but an extroverted person who might be speaking in inferences just naturally speaks that way and thinks that they're being understood. Yeah. And I say that a lot. I learned that from my dad. Like, my dad constantly says, hey, Lynn, what was the name of that movie? That guy, they were doing that robbery thing, and there was that other actor guy, that black guy, and then my mom would just instantly come out, "Oh yeah, that's Maverick with Mel Gibson," and I can't remember the other guy. He's like, yeah, that's the one. I'm like, what? How did you pull that out of thin air? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
And I've picked that up from my dad. I've tended. My friends used to make fun of me a lot in university for being so naive and gullible.
Well, and yet
I've had. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I've had to learn to be more critical. And I guess we're probably a mix of both, but predominantly more one than the other, which obviously would make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyways, there was a huge reflection there of how my parents raised me, and what you're saying in the extroverted style actually does mirror back to me. And I guess there's some things that I could do to adjust my communication to be a little bit more literal.
But you know what? The main thing is, this is about understanding. And when you can understand yourself and why you do what you do, it becomes interesting. So I'll give you some traits of the extroverts. So extroverts, if you compliment their body, or if you stand closer to them or touch them, they feel like you like them. They feel liked, because touch equals love. If you like my body, then you like me. They tend to blurt things out. They tend to like speak immediately. It's a little bit more spontaneous in their communication. And sometimes, like in a fight, the extrovert will blurt out a whole bunch of things and instantly forget what they said. And the introvert, if you put the two of them in a relationship together, the introvert will be pondering what those things meant, because they're pulling out a million different inferences from the blurt out. But extroverts tend to speak first, act first, and process later. Introverts think first and act or speak later. Okay. And so sometimes an introvert will have an experience and they won't like it, and they'll be sitting there for so long, and it could be a year later, and they'll be like, "Damn it, I wish I'd said something. Now it's too late to say something about it." And it's like a year later and they have something to say, whereas the extrovert tends to get it out of their system. And so between these two communicators, introverted communicators, subconscious communicators, will tend to have more stomach issues, more psychosomatic things, because they tend to hold stuff in. And extroverts will tend to be physically a little bit clearer on certain things. Extroverts tend to wear bolder colors. Introverts tend to wear more muted colors. there's
No one
just
look at my shirt. And it's like red here and then gray sleeves. I'm a mix of both worlds.
You mix of both. Well, and so that's the other thing. So there's all these things about how you communicate with the world, but there's a sexual scale. Okay, so the sexual scale, it's a subconscious communication scale, develops from when you're 9 to 14. And that's kind of the age around where hormones start to creep in. Children get to an age where they start to notice more of the sexual innuendos and things. And
girls stop having cooties and they start having boobies.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so you start that like, you know, that picture of the dolphins versus the sexy woman. It's like one of those black and white hand ink drawings. You can Google it anywhere, dolphins versus attractive female. Okay. And, or I think it's even a couple like embraced or something like that.
Okay. I think this is the dolphins thing. I found it.
Oh, you found it. Okay.
Yeah. You can basically see all the dolphins.
Yeah, there are dolphins, but so you show that to a younger child, and they're not going to see the naked people.
They're missing out on a good time.
Right? And you show it to someone of a different age, and they're going to see the naked people.
It took me a second to see the dolphins. I'm not going to lie. It took me a second to see the dolphins. Okay, so well, that was a fun experiment.
Needless to say, when you hit a certain age, your sexual switches turn on.
Between 9 and 14-ish, like you were saying.
9 and 14, that's when it sort of starts around then. And so in that time, you start encoding the relationship interactions with your primary caregivers. Okay?
You start what? Can you say that again?
How your parents or your primary caregivers interact with each other is going to deeply affect how you process your sexual aspect of your relationship. So the first communication stuff that we were talking about, that's how you communicate with the entire world. Now, how you communicate specifically in a romantic nature can actually get a little tricky, because you could be a social subconscious extrovert or a social subconscious introvert and be sexually subconsciously the opposite.
Okay.
So there's a whole other scale of how you communicate just with your romantic partner.
So basically like how a quiet, very meek seeming librarian turns a complete freak in the bedroom.
Yep.
That stereotype. Okay. All right.
That. Or,
gotcha.
I mean, let's put it this way. There is a reason that statement, daddy's little girls are always like freaks in bed.
I haven't heard that one.
Oh, okay. I have.
All right then.
Let's put it this way. If a father is very affectionate with their daughter, okay, and compliments them and hugs them and touches them and engages them, during that age range of 9 to 14, I mean, they're not taking it in a sexual way, but subconsciously their brain's going, touch equals love. And when they become of an age to engage in a romantic relationship, that becomes sex equals love and touch to a degree, but sexual touch equals love. Okay.
Okay.
Whereas if you had a paternal figure who was very aloof with you, if you were a girl, then you're probably going to become more reserved. Okay. However, if you had a paternal figure, let's just go genderized for this because it makes it simpler. Okay. I'm just going to use the traditional family stereotype of male parent, female mother. And if you had a father who pursued your mom and engaged your mom all the time, touched her, reached out to her, pursued her, was physically affectionate towards her or you as a female, I say me, then, and as a guy, if you observed that being the situation in your family, both the daughter and the son in that household are going to think that touch and sex equals love, and they're going to think that if I want something, I need to go get it. Like if I want a relationship, if I want to date someone, if I'm interested in someone, I have to pursue them. I have to approach, I have to touch, I have to make the first move. I have to, in my relationship, be the initiator of sex. It's subconsciously in your programming to initiate sex if you grew up in a household with a lot of affection and touch like that during those years, especially when the father figure was more engaging. Okay. And that can actually happen in very violent ways too. So I've seen abusive households where the paternal figure was quite violent about it and there were beatings involved. And that still actually winds up sexualizing the person towards extroversion. Whereas if you have a household where you have a paternal figure who doesn't engage the mom, and the mom is kind of more doting, and the paternal figure kind of just sits back and waits and doesn't really engage with children, and isn't very touchy and is more reserved, that's going to result in, on a subconscious level, being like, oh, well, if I sit and wait, they'll come around. Like, they'll come to me. And that makes a more introverted person. Introverted sexually.
Now, what about parents that you don't really see all that much? Well, yeah, I think this is probably more common. Like, I never really understood. Like, I don't really remember my parents ever having the sex talk with me, and I don't. Oh. And like they hugged and they kissed. There was affection, but there, I never really saw any sort of pursuing or anything like that. So
they wouldn't have had to have a sex talk with you, but if they were affectionate with each other, that would have been enough to show you that touch equals love.
Okay,
or
gotcha.
That if you're in a relationship with someone, you should be touching.
Now, what about the idea of yeah? So, what if I mean, there's the stereotype of, you know, girls with daddy issues, mm-hmm. who didn't necessarily have a father around, or fathers who are a bit abusive, so they find themselves in unhealthy sexual relationships. So if you're saying that the father is a bit more aloof, well, I guess that's a bit different, because if a father's a bit more aloof, then that's very different from a father that's showing touch in a negative way. Mm-hmm. But if a father just is absent, how does that relate to the woman's sexuality when it comes to daddy's issues?
It can relate to having a difficult time having relationships or finding stable relationships. Here's the thing. Sexual introverts and sexual extroverts all appear the same in the beginning of a relationship. Everybody seems like a sexual extrovert. See, sexual introverts need you to know who they are and know their mind and to be romanced psychologically to be able to have sex. Whereas sexual extroverts, sex, if you give them sex right away, they feel love, and then they open up their emotions. Okay. And so in the beginning of a relationship, when you're both getting to know each other and you keep learning so much about one another, and you're having insight into yourself through someone else's eyes and all of that stuff that happens in the beginning of a relationship, everyone is getting what they need. And so everybody's having sex. So opposites totally attract. Sexual extroverts are very attracted to sexual introverts. And so inevitably in a relationship, there's always one person who becomes more sexually extroverted than the other. Even if you start out as being somewhat closely matched, one person will always become more or less. It's like a polarizing sort of thing that happens in every relationship. And so, like most people have a trend that they're usually the person in the relationship that wants sex more often or wants to engage more often, and one person usually wants it less or feels more pursued. But it's a very interesting dynamic wherein whether you are one or the other, whether you were abused or you came from, like, had an abusive father or an absent father, you're going to fall into that spectrum somewhere. And I think the struggle, it becomes a very specific conversation when you get into people who had absentee parents, because usually the human brain is quite incredible in the sense that we'll find alternate father figures. We'll find alternate mother figures. So a lot of people have like a TV parent that they associate, or they had a teacher, or they had an uncle, or maybe it was a stepdad, right? Or someone else who came in. And so what can happen sometimes is if you have a boy and girl in a family household, stepdad comes into the picture, and the boy all of a sudden, he may feel like, I don't connect to the stepfather at all. And the sister may be like, oh, he's like the best dad ever. Right? And so she may encode extroverted and he may not, because he and the stepfather may not connect during that time period, if that makes any sense at all.
No, this is all the stuff that's in that book?
Yeah, I know.
Holy,
but
how many times have you read it?
Context.
What?
I'm putting it into more context. I've had the opportunity.
You've put it. Sorry, it cut out there. You said you're putting it into a little bit more context.
I'm putting it into more context of how to use it.
Okay.
Papa sort of came up with this a very long time ago, and the way he wrote it was in kind of an old school sort of way. Bless him, because it's so great to have that kind of tool getting subconsciously. But I find that when it comes to really applying it, I've been fortunate enough to, once I learned this, I have a hypnosis school, so I train people to become hypnotherapists. So over the course of, I get people for 6 weeks at a time, and over that 6 weeks, I help them understand where they fit into this. And so I've seen thousands of people go through this program and go really in depth with where they are and how they sit. And so I've been able to see trends, their relationships, the partners that they pick, and firsthand, versus just reading it from a book. So what I'm giving you is more specific, like more usable information than just the theory and the way we use it. So usually a hypnotherapist will only test general subconscious communication, that maternal stuff from 1 to 8 years of age, because that helps us give people better hypnosis sessions. But when I'm dealing in couples, when someone comes in with a challenge that is sexual in nature, or they're having a challenge in a relationship, like they get triggered for jealousy or something else, I use the second scale, I use the sexual communication scale as a way of helping them see things more clearly. I mean, I also use the love languages. I also use how people communicate in conflict situations and there's so many different scales. But I find that the subconscious communication scale is really important because it teaches you to understand your partner and yourself and why you are the way that you are. So
wow, there's so much there.
There's a lot there.
Wow. I feel like I'm trying to play catch up right now with all of that info.
I'm almost glad you didn't read the book. Well, let's put it this way.
Well, so I guess before you go that way, and before you, because I'm just trying to wrap my head around a few things. There's another book that I think that you might really like if you're learning about these things. There's a book by the name of a book called The Erotic Mind by Jack Morin, and it is absolutely phenomenal. I read it about 3 years ago. It's incredible, and it talks about how we create our erotic themes and basically the driving factors behind what drives us sexually. And and basically our unconscious sexual motivations. And there's 4 cornerstones to eroticism. The one is overcoming ambivalence, so constantly chasing someone and winning them over. That's that's eroticized. There's naughtiness, so doing things like having sex in a church, which you shouldn't do. That's very naughty. Power, and longing and anticipation. So constantly thinking that you might get them and just anticipating that they're going to leave the partner that they're currently seeing and then come with you. And so those are the four cornerstones of eroticism, and he talks a lot about people. He talks about how people are raised and how that shows up in their parents, and then how that shows up in their lives as well, as those 4 cornerstones of eroticism. That could be an added component, and then all the book that you've recommended to me. I'm definitely going to grab it. What's the name of it again? I've already bought it, but for everyone else listening,
I think it's the Hypnotist Manual, right?
The Hypnotism Manual? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The Hypnotism Manual. Yes.
Well,
I'll look it up and then I'll put it into the show notes.
I always love comparing and talking about different paradigms, like the one you just mentioned, because I think what you're talking about is much more specific to desire and interaction. And this is like kind of a general container, and you could probably fit those categories into what's more likely to come out of a sexual introvert or extrovert. So sexual introverts are more likely to have affairs because they need to be mentally stimulated. So if in the beginning of a relationship, everyone appears to be a sexual extrovert because the introverts are getting their romance and the extroverts are, getting their touch, as time progresses and that romance and all the learning kind of declines, the sexual introvert stops having as much sex and the sexual extrovert goes, and they start to need to pursue the introvert more, which kind of reminds me of your first category of ambivalence and needing to chase, right? But what's interesting is when the sexual extrovert chases the introvert pulls away, because the introvert needs the mental, psychological, romantic type stimulation, whatever that works out for, whichever love language speaks to them for that. And they need that to open up. And it's really interesting when the sexual introvert isn't feeling stimulated, they will literally look for it elsewhere. And so they're the ones that are more likely to have affairs than sexual extroverts. Extroverts tend to actually be quite loyal to their partner, even though they may seem very flirtatious. Sexual extroverts can seem like they're flirting with everybody, old women, old men, old children, both genders. Like it can seem like they're very flirtatious, especially extreme sexual extroverts. Whereas sexual introverts can get very insecure about that. But it's interesting because statistically, sexual introverts are more likely to stray and have the affairs. And so it's really interesting to hear that stuff. And sexual introverts are more likely to have psychological play in their sexual life, whereas the sexual extrovert will be more into actually doing them. If that makes sense.
Say that last thing again.
The sexual extrovert will want to play them out.
Play out the fantasies.
Play out the fantasies, where the sexual introvert will have them. And so it's kind of, it's always a good pairing when they're together because they balance each other out. But it takes a very sturdy, educated sexual extrovert to be with their partner all the time. I always do this thing when I teach this workshop, and I have a little diagram up, and so I say, okay, what happens when you put a sexual introvert and sexual extrovert together? And it's that polarization of one person chasing and one person kind of running away and the whole thing. And I mean, the more the extrovert chases and is rejected, the more hurt they feel, the more they chase. Extroverts, whether you're sexual or social, hate rejection. They hate it. And so if they get rejected, they will pursue more. They'll do anything to avoid rejection, and they'll pursue more, and they'll try harder. Introverts need their space. So introverts like
How do you
sexual
seduce someone
or
who needs
otherwise.
space?
Exactly. So the sexual introvert, they need this emotional stimulation, and that's where that's where I would insert the love languages paradigm, because that's where you kind of have to figure out, well, what is my lover's love language? How do I trigger that for them so that they feel loved, so that we can have sex, so that I can also feel happy and they also feel happy. And it's this thing of like, I had this one older couple that I worked with, and literally he brought home KFC or Japanese food or Swiss chalet or some form of takeout. There was a lot of chicken in it for whatever reason and what she liked. He would do that, and he would come home and he would like tell her to sit down. He would run her a bath. He would clean the kitchen, set the table, and he'd put it on the table. And for her, that was love. And that meant that he loved her, he respected her day, and they would like that, they'd be like, he'd get it on, they'd get it on that night, and he was very happy, and she was very happy. And it was like their little formula. Yeah, so I have clients do these jars. So it's like you have your jar, your partner has their jar, and you put in little slips of paper things that make you really happy that your partner does. And it gives your partner a way to spontaneously go in there, pick out stuff that makes you happy and do it for you. Right? And bring that out in your relationship. I just think that, yeah, absolutely. They're like, I think we stay single a lot longer to much older ages. Generation of Xers and millennials, for instance, are not getting into long-term relationships until they're quite a bit older, right? In the later 30s, early 40s now. And so as I see that happening, I see people developing more and more quirks and more things that they've developed, like habits of living alone and things that they've gotten used to. And so we each have become, as we're older, kind of more complex in what makes us happy. And it's a little bit more challenging for another person to learn that stuff unless we enable them and support them in being able to learn what makes us happy and support us in that. And so I think absolutely, if my guy brought home dinner, I mean, I prefer shawarma ideally. Honey, shawarma, please, if you're listening. But yeah, if he brought home shawarma, I'd be totally happy. But that's not necessarily my formula, right? And so what's your partner's formula? What works for them, right? Sexual extroverts tend to be a smack me on the ass kind of partner, like men or women, and they enjoy being sexually objectified by their partners, whereas sexual introverts, probably not so much. They're like, compliment my mind, compliment my intelligence, know me, pay attention to me, do something, make a romantic gesture, like perform an act of service, right? It's different. And that's not to say sexual extroverts don't like that, but sexual extroverts are also more easily stimulated by touch, by affection, by sex.
This is, this all comes down to, there's so much in there for people to start recognizing that, because I've run into women who say, I hate it when guys compliment me on my looks. I want you to tell me, like, what about my intelligence? What about my emotions? What about my character? You're just really shallow because you're just looking at me as though I'm for my sexuality. I like that, but only after you've told me about all these other things. And then making sweeping judgments about guys in that sense. And it's like, well, it's because a lot of women prefer, like, actually really enjoy the extroverted touch, the extroverted sexual, I guess the overt sexual advances or whatnot. Well, and same thing goes for guys as well. Guys do the same, like, we do the same thing about women. We do the exact same thing. So it's not just women. It's just that I'm a guy. So when I approach women, that just happens to be my filter, the world that I live through. But I do understand that we do the same thing.
and you nailed it. It's not gender specific. You could be, I think traditionally, sexually extroverted woman was thought of as loose or slutty, and it's kind of now that's okay. Whereas a sexually introverted male was thought of as, a wuss, or, not a real man. And I think it's really important to understand that your sexual extroversion or introversion has nothing to do with your gender. It has everything to do with your upbringing and how you were subconsciously socialized to see relationships, and how you were programmed to communicate love in a subconscious way.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So let's say I'm speaking as the introvert, and the introvert's saying, okay, so I now understand that when he feels rejected, he pursues me more. He's not pursuing me more because he doesn't respect me or my space. He's pursuing me more because he's committed to me. And for the extrovert, they get to learn, oh my God, when I pursued her right away sexually, or him right away sexually, then they felt like I wasn't respecting their mind and their mental state and where they were at, and engaging in them in a way that reflected where they were at. And so I need to take a step back and say, hey, how are you feeling today? What are you thinking? And maybe it's enough for the extrovert to say, hey, I've been thinking about you in this way all day because I really love you. And when I think about how much I love you, it makes me want to have to do these kinds of things to you, or, or like jump you in this way because I need to physically express my love to you because I can't put it into words. And you get the introvert over there and goes, oh my God, that's so romantic. and suddenly you have two people communicating in a way that kind of helps trigger each other.
I actually had stopped recording, and you had said that the first time, and I was like, that's gold. So I needed to put that back in. So I hit record again to hear you say this.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I've got to get out of here in the next couple of minutes because I've got another interview in the next few. So I'm gonna have to get out of here. But this has been amazing. I am so excited to get this book. And how can people learn more? Can people learn more from you with regards to the unconscious? What would we even call them? Unconscious communication styles?
I call it subconscious communication styles. Yeah.
Subconscious communication styles. Okay, I'll probably name this episode "Subconscious Sexual Communication Styles."
That's cool.
Yeah, I'll probably name it that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But if people wanted to, I can run them through the tests, and I'd be happy to give them a consult and help them understand each other. And I do that for couples often.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah, and I usually save it for Valentine's, but if there is a demand, I will run a 1-day webinar where I'll take everybody through it. Yeah, and run a seminar where everyone gets to do the test and gets to be taken through slowly, all through all of what it means.
Wow, amazing. So how can people reach you then?
You can reach me through my website, which is just farzanajj.com, farzanajj.com, or social media, same handle, Twitter, Instagram, all of the above.
Okay. And they can join the 125,000 Twitter followers.
Just a couple.
Yeah. All right. Amazing. Well, for those of you who are trying to figure out how to write that down, farzanajj.com. Don't worry about it. The link will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Farzana.
Thanks for having me. Bye.